Welcome to the Advance Your Art podcast, where we talk about the journey from artist to entrepreneur and everything in between. You've worked hard to hone your craft. Now take it to the next level with tips, techniques, strategies, and routines used by successful artists to grow their businesses and careers. Now, let's get started and have some fun with your host, Yuri Cataldo.
Hello, Catherine. Welcome to the show. How are you today?
I'm great. Thanks for having me, Yuri.
Of course. Thank you for coming back. You have been my most viewed interview in the 100 and whatever amount of interviews I've done. So back by popular demand, I wanted to circle back with you since you were one of my first interviews as well to see what you're up to and then have a small conversation about kind of where things are going with art in general. So What have you been up to in the actually, let's talk about your business. How has your business evolved since like 2017 when we first started?
2017, 2016.
Yeah.
Well, so much has happened, Yuri. I couldn't be more grateful to see artists grow their business, their careers, because, when it's been a while, I have a long-term vision, right? Mm-hmm. For me, like building a business, you need to think long-term. And especially if you're working in the creative field. So now that it's been over like 5 years that we've been doing this, now we're really seeing some artists who like are skyrocketing in terms of their success, the results that they're getting. Mm-hmm. And we've also, learned from what we're doing right, what we're not doing so well from our experiences. So we've, tweaked and pivoted and changed things. And now I think we're in a sweet spot where we really understand what are the elements that can help an artist go from, unknown and going through so much resistance and not being able to get the results that they want to actually seeing some growth, building momentum and reaching their goals. So that's super exciting. We've also started working in 2 languages. So we work in French, we work in English. We might work in other languages. If you're listening and you want to work in other languages, building your art business and career, reach out to me because we're thinking about doing this because we're a global organization, right? We have clients in the US and Canada, Europe, South America, Australia, New Zealand. So obviously there are people we want to serve as many artists as we can. So that's why we're doing it in different languages. And the team is growing. Mm-hmm. We're bringing in new coaches, new teachers. Maybe you're following the Artist Entrepreneur and you're like, what do you mean you're bringing in new coaches, new teachers? Because we haven't really announced it yet. But This is something we're moving away from, the Catherine Orer, who's like the whole thing to really be for the artist entrepreneur community. Mm-hmm. Because it's only when you really understand how artists are growing through the processes that we put in place that you can trust and you're like, okay, I'll try this. I'll give it a try. I've tried other things. It hasn't worked, but maybe the artist entrepreneur is going to work for me because it's worked for so many other artists.
Yeah. Well, this is good. This is fantastic that you're growing and changing. And it's interesting that you brought up the point of having artists not just start something, but also grow their own businesses and add more value. Because I wanted to bring up with you this interesting Wall Street Journal article I read that in 2018, fine art was actually the best investment you could possibly make. It returned close to 11%, where the S&P was negative 5.6%, which I think is fascinating. I would like to hear more of your thoughts on then. So artists who want to have their work be part of this new movement where people are buying fine art as an investment, how do you make your art valuable and add value to your customers?
Okay, so there's a few things that I want to say about that statement.
Sure.
So first, I just want to be cautious because there's also a question of right now there's kind of a bubble and prices, because the investment that we're talking about here is investment on the secondary market, which means investment made art that's been purchased through auction. And right
Sure.
now there's a bubble and we know it, and we need to be very careful about just stating this as something that's just going to be like that every year. And
Yeah.
for artists who want to really understand what it means when I say secondary market, or what really happens at auction, or what the blue chip galleries, how they work, I recommend any book by the economist of art, Don Thompson. He's amazing. I don't know if you've ever read his book, but he's really, really good. He explains it in a way that you almost read it like a novel, like it's just, there's gossip in there. Like he's really, really good. But it just gives you a good idea of just putting things in perspective. So that's just the one thing I want to say. But then, but then for artists who are like, yeah, how can I raise my, because basically what you're asking is like, how can I raise my profile, right? How can I take this to another level? And this is a conversation I have a lot. And I think there's a lot of elements. First, and Don Thompson explains it well, it's about branding yourself as an artist. How do you want to show up in the artist community? How you're showing up with your art, how you're branding yourself so that people recognize you. And if branding, kind of that word just doesn't fit well with you because you find that it's too close to marketing, just how can you hype your artist identity, right? How do you define your artist identity, and how can you really consolidate it so that people can anticipate what your work is about, they understand it, they get it, and they can talk about it, right? We know what a Damien Hirst looks like. We know what a Jeff Koons is, like Takashi Murakami. Like, I'm giving obviously the obvious ones, but still, like, that's, you need to raise the profile of your identity. I think that's the first thing. And then I think the other thing that all these artists that you can see when you're looking at auction results have in common is they go large scale. They have partnerships. They basically get out of their comfort zone. Right? If you want to do something that catches people's eye, it has to be spectacular, right? It has to be. So I'm not saying that you shouldn't, do, if you like to create small pieces, contemplative pieces, that you should stop and just start to be bold. And, if that's not your brand identity, but you still need to understand where your work fits in the market, right? So, and it means that you need to be really, really clear on your identity. And then you need to start getting out of your comfort zone around, like, who can you work with? Who can grow your visibility? Because, Instagram is an amazing tool for artists. I recommend artists to use it wisely, but it's not like it used to be that you can just grow organically if you start posting, right? It's just, it's changed dramatically, and you need to have basically almost like a business plan just for your Instagram if that's where you want to focus your growth. And that happens through, creating projects, collaborations, reaching out, building partnerships, and growing your practice. All these artists that you'll see on auction who are growing, they're not alone in their little studio doing all the work by themselves, right? They really see the work as they have a vision, they have their artistic vision, but then they're really managing it as a business where they have assistants, studio assistants, agents, people supporting them in reaching their goals. And trust me, like, it doesn't come necessarily naturally for anyone. It's just about trying and building momentum, and, as any lean startup would do, build it slowly but surely.
Yeah, excellent. So yes, to backtrack on my previous statement, you're right. I wasn't making the assumption that everybody who then could be an artist was then on the secondary market. And what's even interesting is I'm working with a Harvard professor, our history professor, on a second project, and he has uncovered some secret journals of some of the art dealers who originally were with Jeff Koons, in the early days, talking about how they were overinflating prices specifically just to boost the secondary market. So it's its own separate animal.
But I was listening to an interview recently about a lady who started a series of clubs, disco clubs in the 50s in Europe. And she was saying that, the first thing she did to really drive people to her club was that she would take reservation, but when people called, she would say there was no room. When the bar was actually empty, and she would let people wait in front of the bar, like 50 people, although inside the bar was empty. I don't know if this has happened to you, Yuri, but it's happened to me many times that when I was in my early 20s, right? They make you wait outside, it's freezing, and then you come in the bar, there's nobody. Why? Because it's just to create the effect that, you know, people are interested. They want to go to that bar, right? It must be hip, right? You walk on the street and you're like, oh, wow, there's a huge lineup and I'm trying to get a reservation and I can't get in. And all of a sudden the brand of that bar or restaurant just goes up. And it's kind of the same thing that some galleries do. Like I've heard stories of galleries who say, you know, no to selling an artwork to a client just to create hype around it because they want to sell it to a better, quote, collector, or just create some sort of auction around it so that people say, you don't want to sell it to me? How about I give you more money for it, right? And just create that competition internally. So it's all marketing. So for artists who think that, you know, oh no, like art and marketing and art and sales, that's not how the real art goes. I'm sorry to tell you, but that's how the big players do it. It doesn't mean you have to join, but it's just that I think if you want to operate in an industry, you just need to understand how it works. And it's like in most industries, it's a lot about perception, and you just need to get with that program one way or the other. It doesn't mean you can't be in integrity and aligned with your values. But the best way to succeed in a situation is to understand it.
Right. Yeah, no, you're totally right. And you're right. I have been to places like that where they built up the scarcity type of mindset where they're like, nope, you can't come in here, or I'm sorry, that's not for sale. Because someone tells you no, you're like, but I want it now. I want it more because I'm not allowed to have it. Like that's
especially people who have so much money who can buy whatever they want whenever they want. So you're telling them no money in the world is enough to buy this, and they're like, watch me. Watch me. What do you mean? I have more than you can imagine, right? And that's also why the prices are inflating, right? Because the prices are inflating because there's just, and here we're talking about the really high-end market, obviously, but there's just a few players. And what's scary is and that's why we're saying it's a bubble, because there's so very little number of players. If just a couple decide that, you know, they want to start investing in something else, or, you know what, my collection is good for my legacy, I don't need anything else, or whatever they decide, then this bubble can burst really quickly because it's such a limited number of players. If a few retire from the game, it can just, spoil the entire game.
Right. I just watched a documentary about the wine industry that did that exact same thing. I can't remember, it's on Netflix, but I can't remember the name. But basically it was like this big player from China. He came in and he would start buying like everything wine. He just started buying up like huge stores of Bordeaux and everything else. Turns out later he was counterfeiting a lot of what he was doing. So he was reselling old bottles over and over again. But he had created this huge hype around himself and his expertise that nobody questioned him. And he worked in conjunction with a couple other resellers and like made a ton of money, and then suddenly just left everything and the whole market crashed.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So that's why as an artist, the best thing you can do is work and create new work consistently so that you're prolific, and build partnerships to grow. But it's like that's the best way to build your credibility, is to be prolific in the work that you create and really think it through as how you're seeing your career building, and parallelly, can you say that? In parallel?
In parallel.
Think about what your business goals are so that they align, what you're creating and what you're selling is aligned with your long-term vision.
Yeah. So, but I know we're wrapping up here. Before I let you go, you've mentioned partnerships a few times. Do you have any tips or tricks on how to find partners that could work with your art or your vision?
Absolutely. Well, first, I think you need to get clear on your vision, the values, and what you have to bring to the table, right? Often artists say, I have nothing, because when you're showing up for a partnership, if you're presenting yourself in a way that you're asking,